Welcome back to Home Cooking Hacks, where we teach you how to do great things in the kitchen without a lot of gizmos and gadgets. So on today, what we are going to do is show you how to make your own homemade yogurt. So yogurt itself is a little bit of a thing in our current world, where our modern day nutritional craze has us saying yogurt's good for you, but then you go to the store and pretty much everything you buy is a dessert, not an actual healthy yogurt. The thing about yogurt that is good for you is the probiotics it may contain. Almost all of the yogurts, though, on the market do not actually contain anything live. All they are is a treat, especially when they fill it up with a bunch of sugar. But if you get real plain yogurt with live cultures in it, add your own fruit, granola, whatever you like to add to your yogurt, you can then have a fabulous, very healthy treat. You just got to watch out that you're not putting all that stuff in there. Now, my disclaimer, I don't like yogurt. I've never liked yogurt. Fake yogurt, real yogurt, the candy yogurt, the real stuff, never been a fan of it. But I recognize the benefit of probiotics. So what I do with yogurt is I make yogurt for my smoothies. That is where I get my probiotics. And so what I actually do is I use these ice cube trays and I freeze my yogurt into these trays. And as I do that, I will end up then with yogurt cubes that look like this. And so I use a few of these in my smoothie every day. So this way I have a fair amount of good healthy probiotics without having to taste the yogurt that I'm not a fan of. And so, with that, making yogurt is very simple. It will take between 5 and 8 hours for it to culture, but in reality, making it's good. Now, the warning with yogurt, there is a warning that making anything that requires you to grow a bacteria, which is what we're doing in yogurt, if you do not properly sterilize things, you could be opening yourself up for a challenge. And so you always want to smell your yogurt, make sure it is correct before you save it. I've never had a problem where I've contaminated yogurt. Probably a lot of it's because I actually had a PhD in toxicology, and we did more tissue and cell culture in our lab than anything, so I know sterilization techniques. But I'm going to teach you some of those today. So the things that you will need to make yogurt is you will need live active culture. What I do is I simply use one of my yogurt cubes. If you do not have any yogurt cubes around, you will need to go to the store and purchase. You could purchase cultures. It's usually just better to go find yourself a good yogurt that has live cultures in it and use that as your starting base. So what you're looking for, go to the grocery store and look for a plain yogurt. You want to read the label and look for something that says live active cultures. The one that I have found, actually this is the one I use. I have a Trader Joe's. This is a plain Greek yogurt. And what you will look for is, I'm trying to see if this one actually had it or not. Okay, so in the ingredients list here, if that'll focus in, it will actually tell you live and active right there. Live and active is the key word that you're looking for. If you don't have a Trader Joe's nearby, and by the way, not everything at Trader Joe's is live and active. This is just a plain Greek yogurt. The other one that I have found that works well is Dannon. I usually will start my yogurt with Dannon. Dannon plain yogurt, last time I checked, was live and active. So you're going to need some stock. I just use one of those. I use raw milk. Raw milk, what I find with raw milk is you have to let it culture a little bit longer than you would if you use either a whole milk or 2% milk. Something that's pasteurized and homogenized, you can let that go a little bit. Let that go a little bit less time, usually around 5 to 7 hours. 5-6 hours usually is what I do for a homogenized milk. For a raw milk, I found that I don't generally get good yogurt unless I let it sit at least 8 hours. And so 8 hours is my target for raw milk, 6 hours is my target for homogenized processed milk. And so you will need your milk. What I have here is I have a pan with a lid. You want everything having a lid on it. And I grabbed the lid for the other pan. So everything here needs a lid. This is to help with the sterilization. Just make sure nothing falls in it. So I have a big pan here. This is actually where I'm sterilizing. If you have access to a pressure cooker, that's even better. But as long as something is in solidly boiling water for a few minutes, it will be sterilized. So the smaller one is where I'm using to cook my milk. I want a slotted spoon so I can stir my milk. Otherwise, you're going to get milk on the bottom. And then what we're going to do here is a mason jar. And what is this, a quart mason jar, I believe. And I use the wide mouth mason jars. And of course, so you have your lid. I want some tongs so I can grab my yogurt cube out of the freezer without touching it with my hands, so I don't want to get any bacteria from my hands in the milk culture. And that's one of the things is once I freeze my yogurt, I really try and handle it as little as possible. I want to, in fact, get it out of my trays and into my cups without touching it if at all possible. I'm also going to need a couple thermometers. You could get away with one, but I have two in the house, and so I use two in the house, so I'm going to use these guys here. I use just a random piece of styrofoam I had laying around as a thermometer float, because what we need to do in making a bacterial culture is you need to incubate it. And so what I use is simply a cooler. A cooler is a fabulous thing to have around the house. I use coolers for proofing bread. I use coolers for making yogurt, anything else like that. You think of a cooler keeping things cool. No, a cooler is designed to keep things isothermal. That's the critical part. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to start by filling up my pan with water. And I'm just going to use regular tap water here. And if I have hot tap water, I'm going to go ahead and use hot tap water. This way, basically I'm just going to get a kickstart on heating it is what I'm going to do. And what I want to do is I'm going to sterilize my tongs, and I'm going to sterilize my jar and my lid. And what we're going to do is, let me go ahead and switch my view over here so you can see the stove. So I'm going to use that back burner here for heating this up, and then we'll switch the camera over and look at the milk as we do that. Nothing super critical here. We're simply boiling this first one. So just be careful, especially careful when we're done with this. Once we are, this point here, it's just warm water, no big deal. Once we're done, it will be actually boiling water, but I'm going to want to reuse that pan. So I'm going to turn this on high on the back of the stove, and what I'm going to do is just drop in my lid and my cap. I'm not putting my jar in quite yet. The jar is actually going to be used for measuring the amount of milk I need. I am simply going to also inspect your jars. I have one up here that, let me use this overhead camera. You'll see this one here cracked. So I should probably just throw this jar out. But this will happen every now and again. If you get a jar that cracks like that, just discard it. I'll discard it eventually, or I'll use it for beans or something non-critical. So here I'm just going to use this jar here just to measure out the amount of milk that I need. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go just up to about the rim. We're going to lose a little bit of milk in evaporation, and we'll probably spill a little bit of milk, and we'll probably burn a little bit of milk on the bottom of the container. So you can see here where I have that. Now at this point in time, we're going to pour this guy in here as best as I can. Go ahead and switch over to that panel there. So I just kind of poured that in. And then what we're going to do is crank this guy on. And I do not want to turn the milk on super high. It's will get singed if you do that. You want to slowly heat it up. So right now I'm rinsing all the milk out of the mason jar. And then I'm going to set the mason jar in here. And then usually there must be something on that burner because I've got smoke coming out, and I shouldn't. I might have to turn on the fan here in a minute. All right, so now I'm just going to set the tongs in there just like that so I can grab them and put the lid over here. I'm going to go ahead and turn my fan on there just because there seems to be something stuck to the burner that I don't want it to be stuck to the burner there. All right, so now I'm going to take my other thermometer, I'm going to set it in my milk and use this to stir. And probably about a minute or two we're going to have to stir that up. So what we are going to have to do is get that up to about 190 degrees. The milk should be at 190 degrees. The water is just going to be at a rolling boil when we're done with it. Now I'm going to see if I can get my water temp from my faucet up to, what we have to do is at 125. And I should have my hot water should be at 125 right now. Means I probably will not be able to get it exactly where I want it to be, but I'm going to go ahead and get it a start. And then what I'll do is I'll end up just scooping some of the boiling water into here just to bring the temperature up to where I need it to be. Okay, so I'm just going to leave the cooler, sit over there. I'm going to take my float and my thermometer, just set it in there and close the cooler lid. This type of cooler, I just kind of try and keep in the sink. What I find is that some condensation builds up on the top and drips out the side, gets a little bit moist, so we don't want to do any of that. This is where we're starting, so I'm going to come back on in a few minutes after the stuff is starting to get warm, and then we'll continue on from there. And we can see here our water is starting to boil. So once we get about this point here, we're probably getting close to the point where we can start taking things out. I'm just going to go ahead and let it go a little while longer. So my temperature on my milk right now is a little above 80. So around there is when we want to keep a decent stir going on. And the next thing I'm going to do right now in preparation is I always want to use a clean towel. And so I want to have the freshest, cleanest towel I can to make sure we're not getting any contamination anywhere. So now let me switch back to this guy here. So you can see here that the milk is just kind of being milk. Gonna make sure we start stirring it around. We are at around 100. Again, we want to get the milk up to around 190 degrees is where our target is here. All right. So now on our sterilizing pot, we have a very nice rolling boil going. So that is nice and consistent. So at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and shut that down. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to use a pot holder to grab the tongs. And the reason I have the tongs, two reasons. First is get everything out of the pan. And second reason is I'm going to use the sterilized tongs here to grab the tray, the cube out of the container to put this in. So you want to make sure that your tongs also stay on the clean towel. What is difficult to get out sometimes is the rim is nice and easy, but the lid sometimes gets caught. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that there, and then now I have to fish out the lid, which is somewhat of a chore at times. Okay, got it. So now when you're laying a lid out, what I'm going to do to keep everything sterile, you can see where my stuff is over here. It focuses, is I have the rim set out down like that, and I'm going to put the lid upside down. Now you might think, well, why don't they put it upside up, right side up? And the reason is something from the air could fall on top of it. So I have a little suspension here, so it's not sitting right on the towel, it's sitting suspended on top of the inverted lid. And then what I'm going to do is every once in a while I'm just going to grab this as tight as I can, just kind of flip it just to let that steam out of the jar. That's going to let it cool down a little bit better. So the milk should be warming up in temperature at this point in time. So let me focus back over here and have a look here. So we're a little over 120 degrees here. Again, keep it a nice stir. So we're starting to get close here with the yogurt, and so what we're going to do here is I'm just going to point out, you'll notice some of the changes here. If you notice around the edges of the pots, you may not be able to see it as much, but we're getting a little bit of a film buildup around the edge. The milk is starting to get a little bit of a thicker consistency, and if you feel along the bottom, you're starting to get some milk buildup on the bottom, so you can see it there on the spoon right there. If I can get it focused in right. There you go. You can see that little gap building up there on the bottom. And so this is one of the things that we're trying to avoid too much of that milk buildup on the bottom. You are going to get some, and you'll see in the next step that there's going to be a whole lot more. So I'm going to just kind of keep the lid over here as much as I can, stir it around until we get up to about 190. So right around 190 to 200, the milk will start boiling a little bit. I'm just under 180 right now. So I can actually turn up my temp just a little bit more to accelerate the process. I don't want it to go too hot, too fast, but you know, we don't want to take it 20, 30, 40 minutes either. So at this point in time, though, once we turned up the heat and we're getting pretty close to where we need to be, you just want to make sure that you are giving it a nice good stir. Okay, well, that's going. I'm going to go ahead and open this guy up and flip our jar over one more time. Just make sure there's any more steam getting out. It's getting to the point where we should actually be able to touch the outside. So the jar is actually nice and cool now. So now you'll notice if you can see the milk has a slightly different texture in it now. If you've ever made hot chocolate with milk and sugar and cocoa powder, then you'd probably be more familiar with this, or maybe you've made pudding before. So we're right at 180 and we're going up pretty quick. So our next step, what we're going to do after this reaches the temp, is we're actually going to go over to the sink where we have a cold water bath going. You don't want to just take the milk off and just let it get down to the temperature we need it to immediately. You want to actually get to the point where it's it's going down a little bit more rapid than that. So we are right around 190, so anywhere between 190 and 200 we can stop, and so I'm just going to give it a final stir. So once we stop, you are not removing the thermometer, you are not removing your spoon. Essentially, once the thermometer and the spoon get in there, they are in there until we are done. And the reason is, if you take this out and set it somewhere, you're going to risk recontaminating everything, and we're going to need it to continue to stir. And the thermometer, of course, we need it to make sure we bring our temp back down, which we're going to go down to about 120. We're a little over 190, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off my burner at this point in time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this over to the sink. Alright, so let me go ahead and transition this back, and I have another camera over at the sink that we're going to edit in here. So I'm going to take this, and I'm actually going to do this. I'm right-handed, but I'm going to take this with my left hand over here. And then what we want to do at the sink is you want your faucet completely out of the way. You do not want to risk that dripping water. This, what you see here, is my on-off switch for my faucet, so that's what you're seeing there. So I'm going to take my lid off. I'm going to keep it down right over here in case I need to put the lid back on. Make sure you're aware of where your thermometer is. You don't want that plopping out. And I'm going to slowly set this in a cold water bath. This is just cold tap water. I didn't bother with any ice or anything like that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to stir it around. So stirring it around, and if you can, stir this in the water bath while your milk's stirring around. That's going to make sure that it stays consistent. Now what you're going to notice is that some skin is going to form on the bottom. So if you scrape, you will see that. No matter what, you're going to get some of that skin. So what I actually do is just hit by the edge. I'm making sure not to hit any of the spoon that's going to go back in the container. I'm only hitting aside the edge at the top of the spoon, the part that will not come back in contact with the milk. But I want to get all of that film out. Looks like this time there's not nearly as much as there usually is. Probably just did a better job stirring this time than sometimes I do. But you want to make sure all that's out, otherwise you're going to get a big old piece of yogurt boogers. Ooh, that's not good. We want to get all that stuff out so we're not getting any of that stuff in the yogurt, because you'll feel it, especially like for me I use the yogurt to freeze into cubes and blend into smoothies. I don't notice it quite as much if it ends up being in there, but if you're eating the yogurt, that's not going to be something good that you want. So it's actually a pretty good one today. It's usually I get quite a bit more skin than that. So if you follow the directions I did here, it'll probably work better for you. All right, so I guess we're pretty good. So I'm just going to keep stirring it like this. And eventually what's going to happen here is I will get my temp down. So I'm just going to go ahead and double check my temp. And we are already down to 130 and still dropping. So that's why if you stir the milk while you're stirring the pan inside here, it will drop to temp pretty quickly. Making sure that the water's dissipated from around the pan and make sure that the milk is dissipated from the edge of the pan. And we don't want to get a whole lot colder than 120. We're going to stop right around 120. So I'm going to double check my thermostat there. My thermometer. Not sure why I said thermostat. You can see there I'm right around 120-ish. And so I can probably stop at any point in time. Once I'm confident I'm ready to stop, I can now take this out, just set it aside. And then what we're going to do is come back over to the stove. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert my jar right here. And then using my slotted spoon, I'm just going to go ahead and pour the milk down through there very gently. Just in case there's any more of that film left over, I want to try and catch it in the spoon. You want to do this slowly, otherwise you're going to have a mess on your hand. And then I'm going to stop right before I reach the edge because invariably there's going to be just a little bit of film left over. So you'll see that film left over in there. Pile of it right here. So I'm okay with losing this much milk to prevent all this stuff from coming into there. So that's perfectly fine. So now I'm going to go into my freezer and grab my cubes. There we are. And I'm going to grab one cube with my tongs, set that gently inside there. And then we're going to very carefully set my lid up there. And then invert the jar a few times. I'm going to come over here, double check my cooler temp. My cooler temp is right over 120, which is just about perfect. We're going to shake this up a little bit more. You might come back in half hour, shake this up once more. Generally, I find you don't have to do that. So as long as you can see here that our water level is right about here, so that's pretty good. It could go up a little bit higher, but that's within reason there. So now I'm just going to close the cooler up and set this aside, set a timer. Since I'm using raw milk, I'm going to set a timer for 8 hours. I'm going to come back in 8 hours and take care of this from there. Okay, so after we have let it sit either 6 hours if we're using commercial homogenized milk or about 8 hours when you're using your raw milk, just leave it sit. Just leave it sit out. The incubator will keep it at about the right temperatures. So after you are done with that, pull it out, and then at that point in time, I just take the jar and put it right in the refrigerator, let it cool down. If you happen to like Greek yogurt, you can strain the resulting yogurt through a cheesecloth and just discard or use the whatever drips down to the bottom under the cheesecloth, and then the rest of it is actually Greek yogurt, but you can have it just as the regular. I actually at that point in time put it into my ice cube trays. If you like your regular yogurt, then you can just go ahead and put that right into right into your fruit, your bowls, and granola, whatever else you want to add to yogurt, and enjoy. Once again, always make sure that you are smelling the yogurt. Do a quick taste test, especially the first couple times you do this, to make sure you have the process down right. Any type of contamination could potentially be bad, but that's okay. If you make a mess up, just discard what you have and try again. It's actually pretty easy once you try it, once you get the pattern down. So thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/TomM, and check out our website at homecookinghacks.com for the recipe for this yogurt. Thank you, and enjoy cooking in the kitchen.